He shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the air, and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots.
So what you just witnessed right there was a young man called Dorian Johnson who was giving an interview to the local news media about a very famous and almost the origin point case of Black Lives Matter. And that, of course, is the Michael Brown case. And as you saw right there, Dorian Johnson, who is a friend of Michael Brown, who was with him at the time of the shooting, made it clear to the local news media that Michael Brown threw his hands up in an unambiguous sign of surrender. However, evil white racist officer Dorian Wilson, due to his evil white racism, decided to shoot the surrendering Michael Brown anyway. And this lie, and make no mistake about it, it is in fact a lie. It has been disproven by 3 different autopsies, multiple investigations, including the Department of Justice report, which we will go through throughout the course of this video, went around the world. It ended up sparking rioting all over the city of Ferguson, all kinds of destruction, and of course, a bunch of different police reforms that ended up having officers pull back from their duties that led to a bunch of excess deaths, and disproportionately those excess deaths happened in black areas because remember, the narrative was evil white racism. Well, guess what? News just broke that Dorian Johnson was shot and killed in the city of Ferguson. 11 years later, 11 years after his lie that went around the world, he was gunned down not by police, but by somebody in the community, very likely another black individual. And now this hoaxer, this person responsible for so much damage in our country, is gone. And unfortunately, it looks like it's a possibility that this man is partially the author of his own peril. He signed his own death warrant 11 years ago when he gave that interview, and he ended up living with the consequences of places like the city of Ferguson never getting cleaned up due to the fact that this hoax of evil white racist police in the Ferguson Police Department was perpetuated in part by him. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Dorian Johnson's lies, his legacy, and ultimately the end of his life, which could have been a consequence of his own lies. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Today we heard a lot of good, we heard a lot of bad. What kind of friend, what kind of person was Big Mike, your friend?
Well, I heard a lot of things too, and it really saddens me. It strikes me down in my gut that they would try to throw salt on this man's name after he's deceased like this. And to me, we was around each other. He was a good friend, never spoke down about anybody, you know, didn't really tease anybody about being smaller than him because he was bigger than a lot of people we were around. He was a real good friend. He didn't like to see other people down.
So it's very important for you guys to understand now that although we all know, or at least should know, that the Michael Brown incident was in fact a hoax, the Department of Justice report is unambiguously clear about what had happened. And of course, it is supported by the overwhelming majority of witnesses and of course the forensic evidence that Michael Brown in fact was the reason Michael Brown was killed. It was his fault. It was on him. And it started from the moment that Officer Dorian Wilson tried to initiate a stop against him. Again, according to the forensic evidence, Michael Brown, as soon as Wilson pulled up next to him and rolled down his window and asked him to stop, decided to swing at Officer Dorian Wilson. This was indicated and supported by bruises on Officer Dorian Wilson's face and, of course, Michael Brown's DNA in and around the collar of Officer Dorian Wilson's police uniform. In addition to that, Officer Dorian Wilson being pinned down in the vehicle because he was buckled in, ended up not being able to reach for his taser, so he had to go for his gun, which was on his right side, which he drew while Brown was attacking him, and then Brown went for the gun. The reason we know this is true is because Wilson was actually able to fire off a shot in the car based on the fact that the bullet was embedded in the driver's side door panel. We could see the angle of the shot, and of course that shot hit the fleshy part of Michael Brown's hand, and because Brown's hand was within 6 inches of the muzzle when that shot was fired, he actually had soot and was burned by the muzzle flash of the gun. So Michael Brown immediately upon being stopped by Officer Dorian Wilson punched him and of course went for his gun. But Dorian Johnson told the exact opposite. He told CNN that Michael Brown was the gentle giant. He would never, ever use his size to make fun of anyone or to intimidate anyone, and he was able to say this repeatedly throughout this CNN interview with Don Lemon. However, give credit where credit is due, because once the surveillance video ended up coming out of Michael Brown committing a strong arm robbery that day with Dorian Johnson present at a store and using his size in order to do so, Don Lemon ended up confronting his attorneys, and then his attorney said, oh, well, this was completely irrelevant, had nothing to do with the case, even though, again, that was also not true. Unsurprisingly, Michael Brown doing the robbery was the reason why the police were called in the first place, so yes, this had everything to do with the case.
On this program, your client was interviewed on this very program.
Yes.
And did not mention anything about a robbery, nothing about a QT, nothing at all. All he mentioned was a confrontation with police on Canfield Drive.
That is correct, because that had nothing to do with the incident that occurred. The officer did not know that they had robbed that plate, not robbed, I'm sorry, let me take that back. The officer did not know that they had gone into that store and taken some of those cigarillos. He just did not know it.
But isn't there a certain deception and omission? Isn't that lying through omission by if someone asked you about what happened leading up to this incident and you don't tell them, the interviewer on this program?
Not at all. Lying is when you say something. Lying is when you say something that's not true.
Never spoke down about anybody. Didn't really tease anybody about being smaller than him, because he was bigger than a lot of people we were around.
But Dorian kept lying. He kept spinning the narrative. And more crucially, he not only lied in his press interviews, one of the first things that Dorian Johnson did was go to the home of the Michael Brown family, and he ended up giving them that version of events, which of course caused them to lead with that version of events. And that lie, that falsehood, is something that they still cling to this very day in public. The hands up, don't shoot narrative, again, comes from this man lying to the public, and this man spreading those lies to other individuals who then pretended to be witnesses as well to back up and bolster this particular story. And again, this isn't something that we're a little bit iffy about. This isn't something that we're not sure about. Based on the forensic evidence, we know that because Michael Brown was bleeding from his hand, he actually doubled back and started charging at Officer Darren Wilson at the time he was shot and killed. We know, based on where he was hit in his arms, that it matches a running motion as he was running at Officer Darren Wilson, and could not possibly be indicative of him having his hands up. So yes, Michael Brown's entire hoax is down to this individual, and now he was killed in Ferguson, not by an evil white racist police officer, very likely not by a white person at all, but by a black criminal.
A deadly shooting is giving flashbacks to Ferguson and the killing of Michael Brown Jr. This man, Dorian Johnson, was with Michael Brown the day he was shot and killed by police. Now we're learning Johnson has been shot and killed. Early this morning, shots were fired in a Ferguson neighborhood, and rumors started swirling about who was involved. That shooting happened on Abaco Court, just east of West Florissant Avenue. First Alert Force started making phone calls to find out if the rumors were true, and we have confirmed the man shot and killed at the scene was Michael Brown Jr.'s friend, Dorian Johnson.
Now look, even though what Dorian Johnson did was wrong, it was immoral, and it was unambiguously evil, I know a lot of people are going to react by celebrating his death, but in reality, I'm not interested in doing so. What I am interested in is highlighting the fact that you had an individual, by the way, among many other individuals who are BLM activists, that were so concerned about white people, so concerned about the police, so concerned about this narrative of the police being the major problem in the black community, that in reality, they end up facing that real problem, and that's what ultimately ends up costing him his life. The idea that an evil white racist police officer was Dorian Johnson's biggest problem, should have been his biggest fear, is absurd in every possible way. The Michael Brown case shows us way more so that black violence is more significant than police violence, evidenced by the fact that Michael Brown committed a strong arm robbery and then of course went to attack attack a cop, and then was so stupid in his actions that rather than surrendering after already being wounded, he decided to charge at Officer Darren Wilson with the intent to harm him at least, which of course made the choice for Officer Darren Wilson 100% unambiguous. He needed to shoot him in that particular scenario. And for those of you who are going to say Michael Brown was unarmed, well, he already showed by reaching for the gun in the first encounter that they had that he was perfectly willing to attempt to arm himself with the officer's gun. However, Dorian Johnson allowed this thug, this brute, to get saint-like status in a certain section of the American population to such an absurd degree that Michael Brown at his funeral was described as spreading the word of Jesus Christ the morning that he was killed.
Michael would be smiling, that big gentle smile that he always gives whenever he greeted you. Because Michael was a big guy, but he was a kind, gentle soul. And before he left this earth, the day that he was killed, he was out spreading the word of Jesus Christ.
We have video of Michael Brown committing a strong arm robbery that day. However, you have all these different activists so willing to lie, so willing to spin, so willing to do so in order for themselves to profit. It's absolutely disgusting. And make no mistake about it, Dorian Johnson also tried to profit off of this case.
In 2015, Johnson filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Ferguson, the former police chief Thomas Jackson, and the officer who shot Brown. That suit was dismissed by both parties at the end of 2024.
He also tried to sue on behalf of being near Michael Brown at the time that he was killed due to the fact that he thought he could make money on it. So not only was he lying, not only did his lie do a lot of damage, but the man was so stupid, such an ignoramus, he thought as a non-familial connection, he would be able to profit off the death of his friend.
Good evening, Morgan. It's a sad Sunday for many in Ferguson and beyond tonight, many mourning the loss of Dorian Johnson, the man who made national headlines for being the friend who was last with Michael Brown Jr. before he was killed. On social media, people call the 33-year-old a St. Louis and Ferguson legend that is gone way too soon.
And again, the reaction from the black community to this guy who essentially hoaxed them, he essentially fleeced them, calling this guy a legend that was gone too soon, I find to be absurd in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, the guy was still living in Ferguson. He's still living in the hood. He's still living in this bad neighborhood. So all these different various people who are like Dorian Johnson, such a legend, such a hero, such a guy, I definitely support him, did nothing to support him throughout the last 11 years as he lived in squalor in this absolutely terrible neighborhood. However, they remember him fondly for the lie of Black Lives Matter, which he was a big part in starting. Now, hilariously enough, Dorian Johnson is somebody that we actually do have to thank for something, because one of the effects of the Michael Brown hoax was that police departments across the country ended up getting body cameras, and the body cameras have proven time and time again to be the worst thing that has ever happened to Black Lives Matter, full stop. So I guess Dorian Johnson's lie in that way ended up benefiting society in that it forwarded future truth, so we don't have to rely on scumbag liars like Dorian Johnson.
On Sunday, 33-year-old Johnson became a victim himself, not even a mile from the spot that his friend was shot and killed 11 years ago, in the 9,000 block of Abaco Drive. Ferguson police say they were called around 8:30 Sunday morning for a man that had been shot. They say Dorian Johnson later died at the hospital from his injuries. First Alert 4 reached out to Dorian Johnson's family, but they have not responded.
Now, of course, the Johnson family has nothing to say as of right now. Maybe they'll release a statement at some point in time. I do expect potentially a GoFundMe or a Gifts and Go, and unfortunately, it is going to do incredibly well due to the fact that people are wedded to the Michael Brown hoax. But what's funny about this local news segment is they go into Johnson's history, who, by the way, was arrested prior to the Michael Brown incident, did get arrested again along with his brother after the Michael Brown incident, and of course, everything related to this guy's life, all of his problems, were pinned on the fact that he spoke truth to power, and he was being targeted by the police for doing so, even though the evidence completely betrays that. Dorian Johnson was a criminal. He was involved in some shady stuff. His buddy Michael Brown did a strong arm robbery right in front of him, and he knew 100% 100% that Michael Brown attacked the police officer and deserved to be shot, but he lied anyway. So yeah, I am sad that this individual is gone because he has a family, he has people that cared about him, and it's not right that you would be killed because of a criminal in a bad neighborhood in the United States of America. This is something that we should fight against, and that is a part of my principles and what I do with this channel. But make no mistake about it, Dorian Johnson was not on this same page. He might have superficially believed that, but everything that he did that was actually of worth or of recognition, even though it was worthless in my opinion, was to the exact opposite. This is the man that put out the lie that ended up initiating what is known as the Ferguson effect, which of course still negatively impacts that city to this very day, still hamstrings those officers to this very day, and ultimately could have led to a situation, and we'll have to find out when we discover who the shooter is in this particular case, that cost this man his life.
Ferguson police confirmed that an individual in custody and warrants have been applied for with the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office. While the investigation continues, an outpouring of love and support for Johnson and his family floods social media timelines.
So yeah, I do feel sad for Dorian's family. I do feel sad for his friends, but I also feel sad for the United States of America because as long as Dorian Johnson was alive, there was a chance at some point in time that this man could come out and tell the truth, that this man could say, you know what? I wasn't being honest. I was young back in the day when I went to the press. I was heard about my friend who was killed, and I made up a story. It went around the world, and I'm sorry for that, because for a lot of people, the only thing that will actually get them to believe the truth about Michael Brown is not the forensic evidence. It's not the multiple investigations, the autopsies, or anything of the sort. It's Dorian Johnson, his friend, this liar, coming out and telling the truth, speaking the truth, and finally admitting that he lied. And unfortunately, we're never going to get that. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Michael Brown's bestie getting killed. Till next time.